Jai Shri Krishna. I welcome you, all of you, and Sri P.C. Joshi, our friend, philosopher, and guide, Bhishma Pitama, man of the millennium. We call him with love. I welcome also today's speaker, Sri Sujata Madam, and this uh, first technical session of the 15th, means today, second day session. Today's subject is valuation under the GST Act, and I request Sri P.C. Joshi sir to take the charge of this session.
Very good morning to everybody. On a Sunday, and that too after a heavy cocktail party yesterday in the night, I think majority of the people are still having hangover. Well, all those who are here, I feel that you are the cream of the delegates. Those who have come only with the purpose of studying the law are here, and I'm sure by the time Sujata takes over, the hall would be full. Now, as far as the good and simple tax is concerned, why I say good and simple tax, all of you are aware. It was on 1st of July 2017 that it was brought into force. But 2.5 years have gone by, and we all have experienced what simplicity it has attained, what certainty it has gained, and what problems it has created. You know, that reminds me, a mother describing the bride before the marriage, that she is very beautiful, amicable to everybody, she is obedient, and there will be no complaint. But that was all, everything okay till that veil was not opened. I mean, क्या बोलता है? Gummat, veil, no? Till that veil was removed, everything was okay. But the moment veil was removed, everybody was aghast that the bride had lot of black spots on the face itself. Now, how do you say that the bride was a beautiful bride? But let me tell you, for a mother, her child is always beautiful. And therefore, the administrators, the drafters, the GST Council, before it was brought into force, were telling us that this will remove all your difficulties, there will be no cascading effect, there will be no litigation, and it will be a very, very simple tax. I, for one, fail to understand what that meaning of simple tax is. Because my experience goes way back in the administration of 1946 Act, where it was very small booklet. We have GST. How can we say that it's simple? Anyway, the well-known economist Vijay Kelkar, you must have heard about him. He was the finance secretary and economist. He has published a book recently, and the title is In Service of the Republic. And he has analyzed very beautifully the provisions of GST as implemented till now. And he has, in one line he has said that constant changes in the law have made compliance difficult for small businessmen. This is the crux of the whole story, that today you have a notification. That notification gets rescinded a few days afterwards. Today you have a circular. It stands withdrawn after a couple of days. If this is the position, how can you expect a businessman in the remote place? I can understand a place like city of Bombay, where you have got lot of infrastructure help, but a place, take like my native place, Godhra, we don't get that internet there as we have here. Then how do we expect that the notification issued yesterday in the night, brought into force today in the morning, will have effect of my transaction which I effect today? How will it happen? That means the basic principle, what the Supreme Court has stated in 60 STC page 1, that there has to be a certainty, there has to be well-defined person who is liable to tax, and what tax and what rate. This everything is lacking as far as the implementation of GST is concerned. On 18th of this month, the council is going to meet again, and it is reported that because the expected revenue is not coming forth as expected, they are going to reshuffle the rates from 5% to 6% for all items. Now what will it lead to? It will increase the cost of a common man. It will increase the, what you call, effect, have a cascading effect on all, because many of the items are raw materials. If the raw material increases, the cost of raw material increases, the cost of manufacture will increase, and ultimately it will have a cascading effect. This, of course, we will have to watch in future how it works. But let me tell you, according to me, as Kelkar also has rightly pointed out, that there has to be one rate and all throughout, or at the most two rates. One normal rate, another is anti-expected or luxurious items, etc. It has to be, he has suggested, Mr. Kelkar has suggested that there should be 10% for everything and 20% for luxurious items. These are the only two things that is called a simplicity. Well, now as far as GST is concerned, we have to understand what GST is, because these are all what wishful thinking as far as we are concerned. Now as far as GST is concerned, Section 7, Section 9, and on the top, Section 15. Section 15 is very, very important. Why? Because what are you going to levy tax on? Unless and until you have a value, you have to value it. And therefore, the topic of valuation, which the leading chartered accountant Sujata Rangnekar is going to deal with it. As far as Sujata is concerned, let me tell you, she is a daughter of my friend Sharad Gaitonde. And I have seen her right from the baby, when she was a baby. Now, of course, she is a mother and mother-in-law also. See, anyway, that's all. So, another thing I would like to inform all of you is Sujata has another engagement, and therefore we will have to conclude on time. And that's why, Sujata, you can have your own time. I will expand, I will cut what I have to say. Don't worry. Over to Sujata.
Good morning. I think it's a very good weather so far. The studies are concerned. I think December is the nicest month. And the venue is also very nice. I thank AIFTP for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all. And I also thank all the organizers, including our chairman, Mr. P.C. Joshi, for starting the session on time so that whatever commitments I have in terms of my other engagement after this session, I can fulfill it. I also congratulate the new team which has been elected in the West Zone, East Zone, and North Zone, I believe. Congratulations once again. Now coming to today's topic, which is consideration and the valuation principles. As has been said by Mr. Chairman, valuation is a very, very important aspect so far as the GST is concerned, because unless you know the value on which the tax is to be levied, you will not be able to comply with the law. So far as the earlier VAT law was concerned in all the states, we had only one principle, that whatever has been received by the seller is liable to tax. And that too in terms of money. Now that principle has been done away with so far as GST is concerned. So even if you have a consideration otherwise than in money, it will be liable to tax under the GST Act. So first slide which we have. What is consideration? I will not read out the entire definition because you can read it from the books also, and I have reproduced over here. There is a proviso to this particular definition which says that deposit given in respect of the supply of goods or service or both shall not be considered as payment made for such supply unless supplier applies such deposit as consideration for the said supply. Now you all know that in Maharashtra, this particular proviso had been added to the definition of sale price. It was not consideration, it was sale price, in view of the transactions done by one of the companies, Videocon, who had collected the deposit saying that this is not liable to tax. So circumvent that particular, or to overrule or override that particular, we may say an irregularity, a proviso or an explanation was added to the definition of sale price. Accordingly, here also we find this proviso, wherein if the deposit is taken by the supplier and which is applied towards the consideration, then alone it will become a consideration and not otherwise. So if it's a security deposit normally taken by the supplier, it will not come under the purview of consideration. Now here we have the case of Rajkot Nagrik Sahakari Bank Limited. This is by Gujarat Advanced Ruling Authority. On 15/5/2019, this has been decided. The short issue was that this bank was giving services to the DMAT account holders. For opening and DMAT account, they were required to keep some deposit with the bank. Now, this was an interest-free, refundable deposit. The question came whether this can be considered as a consideration for giving these services in respect of DMAT account opening. It was held by the Advanced Ruling Authority that although the interest-free refundable deposit per se will not form part of the consideration, when you take such a deposit, some benefit accrues to you in terms of taking that deposit and keeping it with you. Now we can, visualize such benefit only in terms of the interest on such deposit. Now the Advanced Ruling Authority has not been very specific in mentioning that the benefit should be equal to the interest amount and all. All that it says is, whatever benefit accrues to you by keeping that deposit, that will be considered as the part of the consideration for giving the services in relation to DMAT account opening. This is what. So it's not that if it is say 3,000 deposit is taken, that 3,000 is not to be considered as a part of consideration, but maybe the interest calculated thereon, which is sort of a benefit accrued. Now here you don't confuse between an interest which is normally earned on a deposit or a loan and for which an exemption has been given. This is only for the purpose of calculating the benefit that is accruing to you. So that is what we have to understand, and from that point of view, this particular AR is important. Sorry. Then for valuation, we know that Section 15, as Mr. Chairman has also said, and rules from 27 to 35 are the relevant rules in which you can get the valuation, the principles relating to valuation under the GST Act. Now there was one more issue which I won't say is directly relatable to the valuation as such, but there is some aspect in this which is relatable to the valuation, and that is in connection with ocean freight. You see, we have two types of transactions in respect of the import of goods. When there is an import of goods, normally the foreign supplier enters into a CIF contract or FOB contract. In CIF contract, you have the freight amount included in the contract value of the goods. FOB contract, the importer normally arranges for the freight or the transport of the goods. Now here it has been held in Indian Potash Limited, which is an Andhra Pradesh advance ruling dated 22/2/19, that such freight, whether in the CIF contract or in FOB contract, the importer here in the taxable territory of India will be liable to pay the IGST on RCM basis. Now, what is the basis for this? They are considering, based on a notification in 2017, that the importer in India shall be regarded as a recipient. Now here, I think there is a sheer disregard to the definition of recipient under the GST Act, which says that the person who is liable to pay the consideration for the goods or services shall be the recipient. Now in case of an CIF contract, it is the foreign supplier who has entered into a contract with the transporter, and the services are given by that transporter to the foreign supplier. So everything out and out. But they have said in the notification that the recipient will be importer, and in both the cases, you will have to pay the IGST under RCM. This amounts to double taxation according to me, but this is a flaw we can see. Coming to section 15, which is a mother section so far as valuation is concerned. Subsection 1 says the value of a supply of goods or services shall be transaction value, which is the price actually paid or payable for the said supply of goods or services, or both, where the supplier and the recipient of supply are not related and the price is the sole consideration for the supply. Meaning when you have two parties, buyer and seller, supplier and the recipient, being not related to each other, meaning not distinct persons, and the related persons, they have been enumerated in section 15(5). If they are not so related, and the price is the sole consideration, in that case, it is the transaction value which shall be taken as the valuation. Sorry. In that case, even if the supplier sells at a loss, now law doesn't say that in every transaction you should make a profit. If you make a loss also, then too, the price which is actually recovered by you, provided that's the only price, will be considered as the value of that supply. Sorry. I have taken another AR to be considered, though not directly concerned with the valuation of such, but it is important to know this. In the recent Bombay High Court judgment of Bai Mamubai Trust, Bombay High Court, decided on 13/9/19, a very interesting issue was decided. See, a landlord had allowed a lease to another party for carrying out his business as a restaurant in those premises. Now, after the end of that particular agreement, the lessee declined to vacate the place. In that case, the landlord filed a suit against him in the Bombay High Court. Now, during the pendency of the suit, the Bombay High Court appointed a court receiver on the property, and it was also directed that until the suit is decided finally, the defendant, that is the lessee who was illegally occupying the premises, would pay a royalty of rupees 45,000 per month to the court receiver. So the question posed before the Bombay High Court in this particular writ petition was that whether that 45,000 which the landlord is receiving is towards the consideration of letting out the immovable property held by him. It was held by the High Court that it is not that in every case whatever you receive should be liable to tax. There has to be a contractual obligation to pay that amount as a value or consideration for the goods or services provided by the supplier. Now here, it is not the consideration, it is the compensation or the damages paid until the suit is decided. Because you cannot say that there was a contractual obligation between the lessor and the lessee, because actually the lessee was occupying the place illegally, without or against the wish or of the lessor. In that case, it was merely damages or compensation, and it cannot be considered as a consideration for any supply of goods or services. So therefore, this was held as, now this particular principle can also help you in other cases, like, because everybody is trying to drag whatever consideration received in entry 5E of Schedule 2, which says that tolerating an act, etc. Now that is not true. If you go through this particular Bombay High Court judgment, you will find that whenever the amount is received by you by way of only damages, only to recoup the compensation, in that case it cannot be considered as a consideration. So from that point of view, this is important. Then we come to subsection 2, clause A. Any taxes, duties, cesses, fee, charges levied under any law for the time being, except the GST law, if charged separately by the supplier. Now here, although they have not very categorically stated that these duties, cesses, fees, charges levied, they have to be levied on the supplier himself. Now, there has not been any such case as such, but if we take the help of our earlier law, where similar kind of provisions prevailed, we can say that Nagpur distillery was one such case where the transport pass fees paid under the Bombay Prohibition Act, that was paid by the supplier on behalf of the buyer who removed the goods from the distillery. The basic liability to pay that transport pass fee was on the buyer, and therefore it was held. Of course, this was prior to the amendment made in the BST or even VAT Act, and introducing that explanation under the definition of sale price. But nonetheless, the principle underlying is that whenever there is no liability on the seller or the supplier under any statute, and he just pays that amount on behalf of the buyer, in that case it should not form part of the value of the supply. So we can also have the Vidarbha Distilleries Kamoti versus Commissioner of Prohibition and Excise. This also, it was in relation to the state excise duty. The Nagpur distillery, which I stated, is in respect of transport pass fee. Then we also have Gujarat Export Corporation Limited, because of which they had to bring in that explanation to the definition of sale price under MVAT Act. The custom duty was paid by the buyer, although documents of title were transferred in the name of the buyer before the goods crossed the customs frontier. So the High Court held that such custom duty cannot be added into the sale price even if the claim of high sea sale is not allowed, because that custom duty is paid by the buyer. The documents of title were in the name of that buyer at the time of paying the custom duty, and therefore it cannot be added. So taking help from all this case law, we can say that whatever taxes, duties, cesses, fees, charges, etc., they should be basically leviable on the supplier, and if he charges them separately in the invoice, then they can become part of the consideration and not otherwise. Rule 35 applicable when value is composite without GST shown separately. Rule 35 is like our Rule 57 under the VAT Act, which applies. You take the price as inclusive of tax. Supposing rate of tax is 12, then 12 upon 112 will give you the amount of tax included in that sale price. A similar kind of calculation is here. But I have a doubt whether reading the wordings or the expression used in that particular rule, only when it is inclusive of tax, meaning supposing it is an exempt supply, you have treated that as an exempt supply completely, and then it becomes taxable at a later date, then can you take the benefit of this Rule 35, treating that price as inclusive of tax? That also can be one of the questions that needs to be, examined and replied. Any amount the supplier liable to pay but incurred by buyer. Now this is a novelty for us. Maybe for the service tax people this is not a novelty. Because for VAT, whatever is paid by the seller, received by the seller, was normally leviable to tax. Now here, if the obligation to pay something is that of the seller, then even if it is paid by the buyer, it will form part of that supply price or value of that supply. This is what this particular principle says. We have the Karnataka advance ruling for this, Toolcom Systems Private Limited, dated 16/7/19. We can also refer to the CBIC circular number, dated 8/6/18, wherein it has been clarified that, see, in case of component manufacturers, especially for automobile sector, companies like Mahindra and Mahindra, General Motors, they will employ such manufacturers, supporting manufacturers, who would manufacture the components needed for that motor car. And for that purpose, because for every motor car, there is a separate specification of that component, and therefore they have to supply that mold, jigs, tools, etc. for manufacturing that component. Now the arrangements between this supporting manufacturer and the main automobile manufacturer could be in different ways. Like you could have an arrangement where the motor manufacturer supplies such molds to the component manufacturer, and then he manufactures everything. Those molds are handed over to him free of cost, FOC basis. So when it is FOC basis, it has been held that, or it has been clarified in the circular, that it does not become part of the value of supply in the hands of the recipient or the supplier of component. And in case where the component manufacturer is supposed to manufacture those molds as well and use them in the manufacturing activity, in that case, even if the motor manufacturer has given them on FOC basis, he will have to include the amortized cost of such molds, jigs, tools, etc. in the price of the component that he supplies to the main manufacturer. That is what the circular explains. And this has been also explained in this Karnataka advance ruling. So the main point to be remembered here is that whose obligation it is to manufacture the molds, jigs, etc. for the purpose of that component. If it is of the component manufacturer, then he has to factor in that price of molds, etc. into the sale price. Now there was little variation in the case of Lear Automobile India Private Limited, wherein the Lear Automobile was the component manufacturer, but they got the molds, etc. manufactured by somebody else. And that somebody else sold them with a GST invoice and with tax. And then they sold it to the main motor manufacturer, again with GST invoice. In that case, the supply of molds was completely different, and then whatever component they manufactured, the price was different. So there you are not supposed to add the price of molds again, because that has been an independent transaction. Then we can also refer to Rajasthan Rajya Vidyut Prasaran Nigam. In this particular AR, RVPN, under the Electricity Act 2003 and something called Technical Grid Standards, which they were supposed to comply with, the entire infrastructure of distribution of electricity and transmission belonged to RVPN, and there were two kinds of contracts with the customers whenever they wanted some amendments, extensions of that infrastructure so that they can have the connection up till their premises. Either the customers could themselves provide the goods and services to make such amendments or modifications, or RVPN would do that on behalf of that customer. Now in the first case, second case there was no problem because that was considered as a supply of goods and services, and whatever GST invoice they would raise, that would consider the price of those goods and services plus the shutdown and supervision charges of RVPN. But so far as the first type of contract was concerned, the goods and services which were supplied by the customer himself, but he had to pay for the supervision charges and shutdown charges to RVPN, because the ownership of that distribution infrastructure was with RVPN. So whatever asset was created, that became the part of books of account of RVPN, and the price which is paid for goods and services by the customer, that was shown as in contribution, because there has to be contra entry, contribution by the customer. But basically the asset came into the books of RVPN. So in that case, it was held that the value which is incurred by the customer would also form part of the entire transaction of making modifications in the hands of RVPN. So for this purpose, this AR is important. Then we have Navodit Agarwal, Chhattisgarh AR. Here the cement company provides diesel required for transportation by the applicant, includable in the. However, in this case, maybe, I don't know, I read it twice, thrice, but what I found is there was nothing in the contract, or there was nothing, no observation in the total AR that diesel was to be supplied by the supplier. Here the transportation contract was given, and the supplier of transportation, he said, I will get you the motor car, I mean the delivery van or whatever, trucks, etc. But the diesel required for transportation will be supplied by the customer. Now, when there is no obligation on the part of the supplier to provide for diesel, how does it become the part of the sale price? That I have not followed. But they have not been clear on that particular aspect, but they have considered this particular provision under the Act, 15(2)(b). And on that basis, they have come to the conclusion. So even if diesel is provided by the customer, it will form part of the price or supply price. Then clause C, freight and insurance form a composite contract. Aditya Birla Nuvo Limited is one AR which we have to consider. Here, you know that freight insurance are the essential part of any supply contract. And we have the concept of composite contract under the GST. So along with the main supply of goods, if freight insurance, etc. is also incurred, that becomes part of the original contract, and the entire price will be chargeable to tax. Now here in this Aditya Birla Nuvo Limited, a point came, they were including the transport charges on a pre-contracted value. Meaning they might have taken some average of the transportation cost, and then they added that transportation cost based on that pre-contract or predetermined rate. Normally what happens, whatever is actually incurred by you, that is charged. But maybe they had some administrative difficulties there. So they included the predetermined price of the transportation there. What the AR has held, that actual freight or insurance or pre-contracted value, whichever is higher, that should be considered for as the value of supply. I fail to understand this, on what basis they say it. Because if pre-contracted value is the actual and they are unrelated parties, then whatever has been actually received by the supplier, and that is the sole consideration for the supply of goods, that alone should form part of the supply price, and not the higher of the two. I don't see any such provision over here. And also we have concept of composite supply commensurate with this principle. Interest or late fees treatment. See, 15(2)(d), it reads as interest or late fee or penalty for delayed payment of any consideration for any supply. Here the word interest is also there. So there is a confusion, because we have an exemption notification whereas interest on deposits, loans, advances, etc. has been held as exempted. Then what is this interest? This interest could be in the form of delay payment, delayed charges. When you make the payment for the consideration late, in that case, some penalty, some late fee, some interest, whatever it may be called, but that is directly connected with the supply of goods and services. So this has been explained by circular dated 15/7/19. What they have given certain examples therein, that if you collect something over and above the price of the product, because the payment was not made in time, then that would form part of the supply price. But if you are giving a separate service in terms of providing the finance to the buyer in order to enable him to buy that product, then that's a separate transaction altogether, and that interest may be exempt in your hands. This is what the circular tries to explain. We have Madhya Pradesh Purva Kshetra Vidyut Vitaran Company, MPAR, dated 22/11/18, wherein late fee or delayed payment charges are related to the main supply and includable in the value of the main supply, hence exempt. Here you see the concept of composite supply is made applicable, in the sense that supply of electricity, distribution, generation, or transmission of electricity, that has been held as exempt. Now, whatever related charges you have, say meter reading charges, meter renting of that meter, application fees for connection of electricity, then transferring your connection from one place to another, whatever charges you take, they have all been considered in this circular, which is 1st March 2018. And such incidental expenses, there is no separate supply thereof. It is related to your main supply of distribution of electricity services. In that case, it is relatable to the original supply, and therefore, if that is exempt, this is also exempt. This is what the circular states. And this principle has been enunciated by Torrent Power Limited, dated 19/12/18. Here also the same thing, but of course, they have not had the occasion to deal with the delayed payments or interest, late fee, etc. That was not the point there. But the principle underlying is all the related or incidental charges should be related to the main or original supply. If that is taxable, this also will be taxable. If that is exempt, this also will be exempt. This is what it says. Then we have Gujarat State Financial Services Limited, Gujarat AR. Here an interesting question came that in the state of Gujarat, this particular NBFC was formed. And all the entities owned by the Gujarat government, where the state government has 100% of the share capital, you can call them as state-owned entities. They were required to keep their deposits of surplus funds with them, with this NBFC. And this NBFC was supposed to give them an interest, and then lend this surplus fund received by them to other entities who are short of funds. And they used to receive the interest from them. Now, this was a transaction of receiving and lending the money like a bank. And the interest portion thereon will definitely be exempted. But the question came that for doing all this, like any other commercial bank, they were not charging any processing fee. Now, in absence of the processing fee, can it be said that the value of supply needs to be amended or enhanced to the extent of such processing fees which have not been actually recovered? The AR held that all these state-owned entities are related persons. So therefore, the transactions between the two, they have to be taken as a transaction between related persons. But they also held that it is not necessary that you must recover processing fee in each transaction. Many of the banks nowadays, in order to induce or entice the customers, they say that we waive the processing fee. So likewise, this NBFC is also entitled to forgo the processing fee, and especially in view of the fact that RBI does not say that in a loan transaction you must recover processing fee. Considering all this, they said that processing fee need not become part of the transaction, even though the parties were related. So this was an interesting case. Treatment of post-sale discounts. This is popularly known as 15(3)(b) conditions. First, A is very simple, that if you give a discount in the invoice itself, you don't have to worry much. If there are unrelated parties, that is the value of supply. But when there is discount given after the event of supply, post-sale, then you have to fulfill certain conditions. What are those? Such discount is established in terms of an agreement entered into at or before the time of such supply and specifically linked to relevant invoices. Meaning it has to be in terms of a prior agreement. In VAT also we had the similar condition. And second condition is that input tax credit, as is attributable to the discount on the basis of document issued by the supplier, has been reversed by the recipient of the supply. So there should not be double benefit. You reduce from your supply price and he takes input on the gross price. This is not done. So to check this, they have put both these conditions. They are popularly known as 15(3)(b) conditions. Sorry? See, we are on a real time. In GST, we have that mechanism available in terms of the returns and all. So you can see that whether he has taken the credit on what amount. That you can see, definitely. Post-sale discounts. 7th March 2019 is the basic circular for post-sale discounts. They have taken various eventualities, free samples not liable to GST, ITC to be reversed under section 17(5)(h), meaning the free samples when you distribute, especially in a pharmaceutical company, it is not liable to any tax because it is free of cost. Then buy one, get one free schemes. Here what do? Have you got to enhance your supply price for whatever you are giving free? It is not required. That is what they say. Because it is construed as a supply of two goods for a single price. Supposing with a toothpaste you get a toothbrush free. Then the price of that toothpaste is to be construed as both for toothbrush and the toothpaste. That is how it has been explained. And the ITC is available even on the toothbrushes, which ostensibly are given free of cost. Okay? So, then volume discounts normally given at the end of the year through credit notes. Eligible for deduction if conditions as per 15(3)(b) are satisfied. Other post-sale discounts, commercial financial credit notes can be issued but cannot be allowed as deduction. See, so they have distinguished between other commercial and financial credit notes and the credit notes which are fitting into the norms of 15(3)(b). Those under 15(3)(b), you can take the deduction. But those outside 15(3)(b), they don't prohibit you from giving the credit notes. You can give it. That is your business. But you don't claim the deduction from the value of supply. This is all they say. Then Quality Mobike Private Limited is one AR, wherein incentives by discounts, rebates which are given by the supplier for making certain excess purchases by the customer. Now here, they were not deducting it from the sale price, nor the customer was reducing his ITC. So there was no question of considering this particular discount as a supply. See, there is another aspect to this. You don't take the deduction of the credit notes, fine. And the customer also does not take or reverse his ITC to that extent, fine. But at the same time, there could be one aspect which says that if you are giving this kind of credit notes for discount, meaning there is some kind of supply of services coming forth from the customer. And for that purpose, you are giving this discount. So this particular AR has said that you cannot construe the situation in that way. See, this discount is given purely as a consideration for lifting my material more than the target or as per the targets given to you. And in that case, I'm allowing you the discount. Maybe I'm not taking the benefit in terms of GST. But then you can't take it the other way around, that there is supply of service from. So there was a circular dated 28/6/19, which is now withdrawn actually. And they had canvassed this kind of a view, that whenever you are giving post-sale discount in consideration for something to be done by the customer, then that discount is not allowable, because that discount will be considered as a consideration for the activity to be done by the customer. So this was other way around. Service by the customer to supplier and supplier paying the consideration. It was construed in that way. But luckily, they have withdrawn this circular. But of course, that is open. I mean, you know the GST authorities, how they consider the law and how they interpret the law. So there is a possibility that this may be treated as supply of something, supply of some services in terms of augmentation of your sales, and you are giving that consideration in terms of the discount. This is quite possible. We have Biostat India Limited, 20th December 18. Here it was a case, they had launched certain schemes. They were manufacturers of crop protection chemicals and hybrid seeds. If you achieve a particular turnover target, then we'll give you some gold coins. The question was whether they could get the ITC on the gold coin. Now, we are not on the ITC, but so far as the gold coins are concerned, they held that it cannot be construed as a discount because Section 15(3)(b) is not fulfilled in that case. It cannot be considered as a reduction from the price, and also held that there is no prior agreement to give such gold coins. Now, they are considering the launching of schemes, the terms and conditions whereof are made available, are made known to all my customers, but they are not taking that as a prior agreement. This is the point to be noted. Now, in earlier VAT era, there were cases like Century Inca, etc., wherein they have held that even your letters going to the customers that you have such and such scheme, that could be taken as an agreement. But here they have categorically mentioned that this kind of launching of scheme cannot be construed as a prior agreement with the customer and you. So therefore, these gold coins, they cannot be considered as a discount. This is what we have to see. Goods sent on sale or on approval basis. See, there are many cases where you're not sure whether the buyer will buy the goods. So you send the goods to him, he examines them, and then he decides whether to buy them or not. So this is known as sent on approval basis. There is a circular dated 18/7/19 for that. When the goods are sent outside India, see, inside India is fine. When it is sent to one place to another, it will not be treated as the supply. Provisions of section 31(7) read with rule 55 will have to be considered for that. In the circular, they have considered an eventuality when the goods are given outside the state, meaning outside India, outside India. Then whether it will be treated as a zero-rated supply. They have said it is not a zero-rated supply unless and until the supply crystallizes. Meaning he approves the goods, he said, yes, I'm taking the goods, that time the supply crystallizes. And then you have to see whether there is a liability or not. So they have referred to these provisions because the provisions say that if within 6 months you do not receive any response from the buyer, the goods are not received back by you, in that case, it will be construed that there is a supply of those goods to the customer. And therefore, it will be liable to GST as a supply. Now, whether CGST, SGST or IGST is to be levied is not clarified over there. But now this circular dealing in a case where it goes out of India, I presume that it should be taken as an IGST. If it is a zero-rated supply, then you have two options, with IGST or without IGST. This is what I presuppose. That has not been clarified in the circular as such. Then we have principal and agent relationship. Rule 29 deals with this. Principal and agent. But you have to also see para 3 of Schedule 1, which says that the transactions which are without consideration will be deemed to be supply. Now in those transactions, the principal agent is covered, but not in all cases. Only when the principal dispatches the goods and the agents receive them in order to supply them further on behalf of the principal. Or agent supplies the goods to principal, who agent receives them on behalf of the principal and then supplies them. In those cases only, it is held like our consignment agent. It is held that it is liable to, or it is deemed supply. So this particular circular dated 5th November 18, it decides when do you have this kind of agent-principal relationship. DCA is Dale Creditor Agent. It's a special kind of agent who undertakes to make the payment for the goods supplied if the customer doesn't pay. Normally their agency commission is also higher. And these DCAs, there are certain complications involved in terms of the transactions, and they have been explained in this particular circular. Now it says that whenever the agent receives or supplies the goods on his own behalf, he issues the invoice on his own account, in that case, he is liable to pay the tax or GST. But when he's doing it, he's not undertaking to supply, receive the goods himself and raise the invoice himself. The supplier, the principal, directly issues the invoice. In that case, it will not be treated as a supply from the principal to the agent. That is what has been explained over here. Now this DCA, why they have considered DCA only? Because DCA, sometimes what happens, he is liable to make the payment if the customer doesn't make the payment to the principal. So he makes the payment. Now he has to recoup that amount from the customer. So he charges him some interest. Now in that interest, they have clarified whether it is liable to be included in the value of supply or not. So when he is not acting as an agent, as per the principles which I explained just now, then interest on loan given to the customer is exempt as per the notification 12 of 2017. However, when he is an agent, as per the criterion, loan transaction is not an independent supply and gets subsumed in the supply of goods. So interest on loan in such a case will not be exempted, because then he will be recovering that as a, like as we saw that 15(2)(d), interest, late fee, delayed charges, etc. In terms of that, he will recover that amount, which is relatable to the supply of original goods or services. And therefore, it is liable to tax. No exemption. Then we come to the most dicey area, and that is services provided between distinct and related persons. Here you see, there has no clarification as such they had circulated a draft circular in this respect. Now, what is this issue? See, we have many companies who have branches, depots, etc., all over India. And the HO, which is situated in one state, it undertakes certain common activities on behalf of all the branches, such as HR functions, IT functions. And such common functions are done on behalf of all the branches. But the HO normally, pre-GST period, was not raising any debit notes. Sometimes they were raising debit notes only to, for the purpose of their books of account, because branches, etc., were considered as cost centers. So in order to apportion that cost, they used to send the debit notes. The consideration may or may not be received. But in this case, we know that the branches of the same legal entity, it becomes a related person or distinct persons. And they're supposed to take a separate GST in also. In that case, whatever transaction takes place between two branches, or HO and a branch, or branch and an HO, that will be liable to tax. But the question here is, what happens to the common facilities, common functions that are carried out by the HO? Now, there is one school of thought that these common functions need to be apportioned by the HO amongst all the branches. And that is deemed to be a supply of service by the HO to the branches. Now, how do you evaluate such services? Because they are given actually by the same branch. Now, there was one AR called Columbia Asia Hospitals Private Limited. In this case, the contention of the appellants was that the employees of the HO, they are not employees only of HO. They are employees of the entire legal entity, including the branches. So whatever they are doing for the benefit of the HO, it accrues to all the branches, no doubt about it. But then there is a relation of employer-employee between them. Although under the GST law, branches are considered as distinct persons. It really doesn't matter, because after all, it's one legal entity and there is employer-employee relationship. But the advance ruling has taken a view that it is not, see, under the GST Act, we have this particular fiction where the branches are treated as distinct persons. So that fiction has to be taken to the logical end. And therefore, whenever there is a transaction between two branches, it is like as if it is between two distinct persons. And the services which are supplied by the HO to the branches, they have to be evaluated and the IGST has to be paid on them. GST or IGST has to be paid on them. This is what this particular Columbia Asia advance ruling says. It has been affirmed by the appellate authority of advance ruling as well. And what it says is, you don't take it as the employee of HO or the service provided by the employee of HO to the other branches. No, it is the service provided by HO to the branches. So therefore, HO and branches being distinct persons, you have to consider these services as provided by HO to branches and vice versa. The question here comes that of evaluation. Now, this particular draft circular has given certain examples. For example, say HR function. If you have a budget of 10 lakhs for the year, then you divide that 10 lakhs budget based on the number of employees in each branch. So in short, Rule 31 of the valuation principles. That will be made applicable over here because you need to have some reasonable basis for apportioning. See, everybody can have a different perception regarding such evaluation. But so far as you can base it on some rationale, I feel that should suffice. Because there is no hard and fast rule. I think they could not have any hard and fast rule, and that's why they have not come out with this circular. This circular has not seen the light of the day. Therefore, what one has to understand is, for evaluation purpose, you need to have some reasonable basis. Sometimes it may so happen that a person in one branch gives a service to another branch, say IT service, to another branch. Then the cost of that employee, which has been incurred on account of that another branch, will have to be taken as a supply of service by one branch to another. It is a very difficult proposition to evaluate such services. There is no hard and fast rule. Now we'll have to see the music when it comes before the GST authorities and what view they take in respect of it. There was no clarity regarding this apportionment of the common services, and therefore many of the SSCs have not done this exercise at all. And in the GST audit, we come across such cases, and we have to advise our clients that please do it. Then the question, will the branches get the ITC or not? All these questions will come. Because then it becomes an afterthought. We have already missed the bus so far as ITC is concerned. And therefore, this becomes a problem area. But it can involve a huge financial cost on the part of the assessee. See, the circular basically tries to distinguish between the services which are procured from an outsider third party, wherein you get a tax invoice, there is a GST levied thereon. The services or the goods are meant for all the branches, and you can distribute that through the ISD mechanism. So they have very categorically stated. So that just gives us an inkling that how the GST authorities are thinking on this point. They say that whenever you are sourcing it from outside and you have a GST invoice, then you have to distribute it as per the ISD mechanism, and you have to take the registration for that. Whereas whenever you have common functions which are performed in the HO itself, they are not procured from outside. In that case, you need to have some reasonable basis for distributing that cost amongst the branches. This is, we can say, a principle underlying this circular. Then branch transfer of goods, we can also refer to some of the ARs. One of them is Kansai Nerolac Paints, where they were actually sending the goods as 110% of the cost of the goods. That is what is provided in Rule 30. Rule 30 says that whenever you don't want to fall into that Rule 28 or 27, you can say that 110% of the cost price. But then they wanted to shift to the first proviso of Rule 28 and apply only cost price, 100%. The Advanced Ruling Authority allowed them. So instead of 110, now they are charging 100% because the recipient branch is eligible to claim the ITC. That's the criterion. And Rule 28 allows that. Now, one more question therein. If the second proviso to Rule 28, which considers the transactions between related and distinct persons, because there is no consideration, so you have to determine what should be the consideration. So it's open market value of the like kind of goods and services, etc. You might have read that rule. Now here, the question comes, as per the second proviso, if you read it independently, it will say that if the recipient is eligible for ITC, the invoice value will be taken as the open market value. Okay. So some people will ask whether 0 is acceptable or not, or rupee 1 is acceptable or not. In GKB Lens Private Limited, they have said you can put 0 value if you want, but then the recipient will not have any ITC. So this cannot become a mechanism for transferring your, IGST to another state. Then in case of specs makers, opticians, a different view was taken. These two provisos of Rule 28. The first proviso allows you to have the 90% of the open market value as your invoice value. And the second proviso allows you, if the recipient is entitled to ITC, it is your invoice value. Now, we were reading it independently. In specs makers, they have said that these are not independent provisos. Because if you read that rule carefully, it says that you shall take the value as the open market value or the value of like kind of goods and etc. And therefore, first proviso, when it says you can take 90% of such open market value and you opt for that, then in that case, that becomes the open market value. And you have to read both these provisos together, and they interpreted that when you take 90%, that becomes your open market value as disclosed in the invoice. So this 0 or rupee 1, etc. will have no place at all. Of course, that's a matter of interpretation. One can also read it independently. And it actually is revenue neutral so far as, because according to the AR, they said this should not become a mechanism to pass on excess ITC or not to pass on any ITC. Both ways it can work. So the GST rules have not given you this handle for manipulating your ITC. And therefore, once you go in for the first proviso, you are governed by the second proviso in that manner only. So 90% if you take, it should be 90%. But of course, it's a matter of interpretation. 31A, 32, these are various rules in various situations like foreign travel or travel agent, then banking industry, whenever you have exchange of foreign exchange. They have given certain rules in respect of that. There is no point in discussing about them. They are clear in their verdict, and you can follow them as per the strict rule. Here 32(5) is the rule which seeks to levy GST only on the difference between the sale and purchase price in case of second-hand goods. We have a case of SAFSET agencies, and they have held that paintings or antique jewelry, you cannot apply Rule 32(5). Because antique jewelry or paintings, you cannot say they are used or second-hand. They have their value because of their being old. And therefore, 32(5) doesn't apply to such goods. Then Shambhu Traders Private Limited, they have held that it applies to lead acid batteries of a motor car as well. Then we have the concept of pure agent in Rule 33. Notwithstanding anything contained in the provisions of this chapter, the expenditure of cost incurred by a supplier as a pure agent of the recipient. See, this has been borrowed from the service tax regime. And there are certain conditions that supplier acts as a pure agent of the recipient of the supply. When he makes the payment to the third party on authorization by the recipient, the payment made by the pure agent on behalf of the recipient of supply has been separately indicated in the invoice issued by the pure agent to the recipient of service, and the supplies procured by the pure agent from the third party as a pure agent of the recipient of supply are in addition to the services he supplies on his own account. And then you have explanation what the pure agent means. enters into a contractual agreement with the recipient of supply to act as his pure agent to incur expenditure or cost in the course of supply of goods or services. Now here, contractual agreement, do you mean to say it has to be an agreement in writing? I don't think so. But chairman can throw light on this. Contract Act doesn't say that you must have an agreement to sell in writing everywhere. But that has to be gathered from the various terms and conditions and the conduct of the parties that he was supposed to. Now, they have given an illustration. Corporate service firm A is engaged to handle the legal work pertaining to the incorporation of company B. Other than its service fees, A also recovers from B registration fee and approval fee for the name of the company paid to the registrar of companies. The fees charged by the registrar of companies for the registration and approval of the name are compulsorily levied on B. A is merely acting as a pure agent in the payment of those fees. Therefore, A's recovery of such expenses is a disbursement and not part of the value of supply made by A to B. Now, this is my observation that the concept of or the notion of pure agent would apply best when it is in respect of some statutory levies, because statutory levies are normally directly on the person who is liable to pay them. So the other person just facilitates that payment. That's it. So there probably you can successfully plead that this has been done as a pure agent. But so far as the other cost relating to the supply of goods or services is concerned, I'm doubtful, because then everybody would, show different components of that supply in the invoice and try to say that this was done as a pure agent on behalf of the buyer. This is not allowed, and this is what they are not contemplating here. So there are many stringent conditions which need to be fulfilled in order to plead yourself as a pure agent. So you have to be extra careful. And also service tax law also, we have certain principles laid down in various judicial pronouncements, which also need to be seen, because the wordings in both the statutes is the same. So pure agent is not that easy concept to follow, and that should not be used rampantly to reduce your GST liability. Only in a case where it complies with all these conditions, you'll be able to successfully claim it. Thank you so much for hearing me patiently. Thank you.
Friends, you have now at least mastered how to value the supply. She has supplied us several things, but that valuation will have to be done by us. And that's why I keep it open for any query. For the next 10 minutes, she has agreed to answer the queries. Please. My thinking is entirely different. You will know it. But let us see, as far as she is concerned, you raise a query, whatever you want, because my thinking is entirely different. I'm going to the root. Don't worry.
You
Yeah.
provide different views.
Yeah.
You provide me different views on.
Okay. Any other query?
One query. Now that deposit is not to be considered as a consideration, as per definition. But in case of services, if you receive advance, it is to be considered as a taxable amount.
Advance is different than the deposit.
Now, what are the chances that it can be treated as a deposit and not advance or
So
as
that
advance?
you have to see the terms of the contract. I mean, That you cannot have any hard and fast rule about it. Whether it's an advance or a deposit will have to be seen from the terms and conditions.
And another one, agent,
Ah.
pure agent.
Sorry?
Pure agent.
Huh.
Pure agent.
Huh.
Now, you say that in respect of taxes which are paid on behalf of principal, difficulty will not arise. But for other charges, there may be difficulty. But then whether within an agent, there will be two possibilities that something is considered.
Yes, of course, of course. You see, under the service tax law, they had specifically provided for certain exclusions from the value of supply, value of service. You understand? Like in case of a travel agent, the basic fare price can be excluded and only the commission can be, charged to service tax. That was the thing. So here also we can probably say that basic price of travel fare also can be excluded from the.
No, I am thinking of
ah.
a, suppose the clearing house agent. Now they pay custom duty on behalf of the principal, as well as they are also arranging transportation and other loading
Yes,
unloading.
yes.
Now there is it
This,
possible
this
that
example was also given under the service tax law. So if they are doing clearing for forwarding services, that's a different service altogether. And all other services for which they are paying the actual cost. But I think it will be better if you reduce that in writing, that this is my, responsibility, but you will be doing that on my behalf. I think that will be, better. Instead of leaving that to the interpretation of the authorities.
no, my only one thing which I still feel is a agent will remain agent for all purposes. There can be two entities within one agent. That one he is acting as a pure agent, one is acting as a supplier. Is it? that
No,
one-
I don't think there is any difficulty. You can have a person in a dual capacity, as an agent and also as a supplier.
Sujata, some.
Ah.
Ton. Yeah. We were talking about the evidence for proving everything. Established trade practice. Now you say agent, you should have clear writing.
मोठ्याने
Now,
बोल जरा.
in case of CHA,
हाँ.
in case of CHA, in
हाँ, बोल,
case
बोल.
of CHA, there is normally an understanding that these are the charges I would pay and these are the charges would be paid on your behalf. So I think every time you need not have things in writing. Otherwise, what would happen on the backside of the invoice? They will have to write the conditions. Is that what is contemplated?
No, no. As I said, and that's my view, that you don't need to have a written contract. But then somewhere, also, although it's not a legal condition to have a written contract, it is in the interest of both the parties that you reduce in writing that this is my responsibility, but you will be doing that on my behalf because I don't want to go into the hassles of, doing all that. So you will do it on my behalf and I'll reimburse you that cost. So basically that should be the liability of the recipient of the goods or services which has been discharged by the supplier. So if that kind of a nexus can be shown, then you will be able to successfully. Pure? Huh. Yeah. I don't think there is any, liability to have it on a stamp paper or something. I don't think so.
Good morning, madam. Madam, my question is relating to post-sale discount. Here the word written in 15B two is text, 15.3B is the terms of agreement entered. So whether it should be a written agreement in this part for sure, or there can be an oral agreement between the dealer, between the parties.
See, so far the trade practices is concerned, we find that many a times the suppliers, manufacturers, etc., they circulate among their customers some policies. At the beginning of the year, they have certain policies. Then they distribute certain circulars. And they make it known to the customers that this is what the scheme is in advance. You understand? And that has been taken as a contract under the VAT Act. But now the biodas, this AR which I explained, they have said that this will not be treated as a prior agreement. Now what do they mean by an agreement? Do they always want it in writing on a stamp paper? Is not clear. They have not said that. And that cannot be the intention of the GST law. See, once the buyer and the seller or the supplier and the recipient are in the know of that particular scheme or a discount, I think that should suffice.
Thank you.
Chairman will explain this
Thank you.
point. True. See, they have taken the simplest example of HO being in one state and branches in other states. But there could be complexities, as you said, region, then zone, and then branches, then the depots, etc. So everywhere you'll have to see on behalf of how many branches or entities you are working and what common functions you are doing. So that's going to be a little complex issue. And that's why they are not coming out with very clear instructions, you know. I think that's the reason. Who? C and F agent? I don't think so. No, no. No, no. See, principal and agent, as they've said, they are considered as different persons if they fall in para 3 of schedule 1. You understand? So they are different persons. Huh. And they are rendering services. Huh. Related persons, I don't think the cooperative, it doesn't come. I think that privilege is with you. I mean, yes. See, even if I am a normal businessman, I have a privilege to sell my goods to some customers at a lower price and some customers at a higher price. Can you raise an objection? Yeah. No, no, you can't see any direct benefit accruing. Direct benefit accruing from the member to the cooperative society because they are selling at a subsidized price. So I don't think that view can be taken. Yeah.
Ma'am,
Yeah, but then there has to be something which couples with that consideration and that you need to show. And what is that here? No, no. If you can show it very, categorically, then the matter is different. But otherwise, in the normal course of business, I don't think so.
ma'am, this is regarding branch transfer of goods. Branch transfer of goods.
Huh.
My one office in Mumbai, Maharashtra, and one in Gujarat. In Gujarat, I am purchasing the goods and some services also I am taking. So there is an input credit is there, and all sales are from Maharashtra. So I want to utilize my input. So what I do, rupees 1 lakh goods, I am transferring at 10 lakhs rupees to my head office. And the input is utilized like this. Whether it is workable,
See, the valuation rules have been given, and one of the ARI specifically mentioned that you can't use this mechanism of branch transfers, etc., as a tool for transferring excess ITC or less ITC, etc. This is one of the views.
Right.
And you have to strictly follow Rule 28 for that purpose.
yeah.
What does Rule 28 say? It should be open market value or the open market value of the like kind of goods and services. So if you are inflating the price of your goods while sending them to the HO, there is bound to be an objection to that. That's what I feel.
But in one it is written that one case laws,
Who's
this
that?
is if it is a zero, if zero value is adopted, then if we adopt zero value, whether we can inflate the value. Zero value means we are going down to the value. So whether we can inflate
This
value.
point is very doubtful.
Yeah,
They have said that zero value, so no ITC will be given.
yeah.
You understand? So this is somewhat they have taken as an adverse view they have taken.
Yeah.
But so far as the inflated price is concerned, where your clear objective is to utilize that ITC.
Yeah, right.
I don't think the, authority. Who is that?
वेट अ मिनट वी हैव इंपोर्ट ऑफ गुड्स एंड उसमें कैसा है कि वैल्यूएशन एज पर कस्टम पे वो लोग ड्यूटी भरवा रहे हैं और आईजीएसटी भरवा रहे हैं तो कैन वी चैलेंज क्या हो रहा है जैसे बीटल नट्स है वो 1000 रुपए का आता है उस पर हमको आईजीएसटी भरना पड़ता है 3000 रुपीज पे और वो 1000 रुपए का माल सिर्फ 1200 में बिकता है इसमें हम लोग इन्वर्टेड ड्यूटी भी नहीं लगा सकते क्योंकि रेट ऑफ टैक्स 18 था इसमें भी 18 है 1000 is the price sold consideration. So under GST, can we challenge that the GST valuation should be taken, valuation as per GST, whole sole consideration should be taken for IGST, not the custom rate?
No, this particular provision is covered by IGST,
Yes.
right?
And they are
So-
charging IGST, na? We are also paying IGST on import.
Valuation of import,
Yes.
that is provided under IGST Act,
Yes.
correct?
Huh.
So there they have said it will be as per the Customs Act.
Yes.
Am I right?
Huh.
Customs Act.
Yes, that's
So
a
if
specific
customs
import.
valuation is different and it is
Higher.
at a higher
Very higher.
price,
Very higher. Huh.
you have to follow that.
That accumulated ITC again and again, a huge amount of ITC has accumulated because of the overvaluation of the custom.
Yes, but that's the flaw of the act,
So that's why I'm saying whether we can challenge that. Whether we can challenge that 1000 रुपए की
I
सुपारी
think
को
our
3000 रुपए पे
chairman
ड्यूटी
is an advocate. He can.
नहीं 1000 रुपए की सुपारी को मैं 3000 पे ड्यूटी भर के मेरा 50 लाख रुपए आईटीसी जमा करके बैठा हूँ उसको मैं इन्वर्टेड कॉमा में रिफंड भी नहीं ले सकता तो whether we should challenge it
See,
or
there
not.
are many such eventualities. You have, accumulated ITC on different accounts. You are not able to take the refund of that. This is one of such eventualities.
So, but
So
in
we
your
can't
example,
inverted, yes sir.
in your example, did you challenge the customs valuation for BCD?
No, BCD, this is a rate, custom rate. They are charging custom, they have right to say. But for IGST, I am saying
No, no, sir.
IGST only. Custom,
We are,
BCD
sir,
is
IGST
already
is
not
only a
refundable.
rate. IGST is only a rate applied on the customs value.
Huh. Sir, BCD is not refundable, so I am not worrying.
No, I am
I
saying
am
the
cost
value,
that thing.
the
But
basic
IGST
value.
is refundable, na? The refundable amount is blocked. That's why. Na?
But correct.
Huh.
Now 1,000, when the customs valued it at 3,000, did you challenge that before the customs authorities? That's what I'm saying.
So that is mine because it's cost to me. But something which is refundable and kept lying.
I think that has to be challenged first in customs
That is the
authorities.
point. That's why whether I should challenge or not.
So there are two challenges. One is the valuation itself, and the second is the accumulation of IGST.
Thank you, ma'am.
Madam, one last question, please. Yeah,
Pune.
last. In the continuation of the branch transfer of the goods, what he said, instead of 1 lakh or 10 lakh rupees, can we show it as transfer of supply of services from one branch to another branch to transfer the credit of IGST? Supposingly in Delhi, I have a branch which has a ITC in the credit ledger at 1 lakh rupees, and in Bombay, I have a liability of say 50,000 rupees for which I am short of funds. Can I raise an invoice for supply of services from Delhi to Bombay branch and make the payment of tax, and the Bombay branch claims the ITC?
I once again I tell you, you can't utilize this mechanism for adjusting your IGST or GST, for making or enabling the other branch to, avail of that credit. It has to be on some rational basis. And unless you prove if there are no common services provided by that branch to the other, how can you say you are transferring the services? This cannot be used as a mechanism for that. Authorities. See, CB, you have to consider the entire scenario.
Good morning, ma'am. This is genuinely last question. Under Rule 35, which refers to the valuation of differences. Genuinely last question,
Tax
at least
included
from my
in the
side.
price.
At least from my side. Under Rule 35, it refers to the valuation between the difference of purchase price and the sale price. Now, my question is, when the car dealer who is dealing in the second-hand used cars, so whatever direct expenses he is incurring, for example, painting and certain repairs, whether purchase price can add these direct expenses, part A, and part B, that whatever ITC is strictly prohibited for such valuation, but whatever ITC, I mean whatever taxes which have been paid towards the painting and other services which are direct expenditure, which are to be capitalized so far as purchase is concerned. So it adds to the value of car, and that ITC can be taken benefit of that.
Yes, that becomes the, see the condition in that particular rule which you're talking about, 32(5) I believe, yes?
Correct.
The condition is that you're not taken the ITC on the purchases. That's
Correct.
the condition itself.
Correct.
So that ITC, if you're paid, that will definitely must have been capitalized. You understand?
Okay.
So that becomes the cost of the purchase itself.
Okay.
And the sale price and purchase price, whatever difference comes, on that you have to pay the tax.
But the direct expenses also can be considered as the purchase price?
Sorry?
Direct expenses in respect of repairs, in respect of painting, in respect of modifying the car, that can be added to the value of purchase.
No, purchase price of that person.
I'm purchasing.
And the sale price of my sale price.
Ma'am, I'm purchasing car at the cost of 5 lakhs rupees. I'm incurring expenditure of 50,000 rupees by way of.
I got your point.
Yes.
I got your point.
So can I take 5 lakh 50,000 rupees as the total purchase price?
See, in order to, if you are any, say, a general manufacturer, okay? So you do everything to make your goods marketable, correct? Now you are a dealer here in second-hand goods. Your goods will not become marketable unless and until you incur this cost, correct? So that, according to me, becomes the cost of the purchase itself, which is directly relatable to those goods, to make them marketable.
True.
Therefore, according to me, it should be allowed.
Okay, thank you.
ये राहुल આ બધું કાર્ડ ને બધી रुलावत जी किधर गया हाँ See, my thinking as far as the GST is concerned entirely goes to the root of the matter. And this is why. Basically, as far as branch transfers and inter-branch expenses, etc. is concerned, in my view, it cannot be covered by GST at all. Why? Because if you see the definition of the term recipient, supplier, taxable supply, person, everywhere if you see the definition, it postulates the existence of more than one entity. And therefore, in my view, the provisions wherein they have said that a HO and a branch will be treated as an independently different entity itself is absolutely illegal, and taking the advantage of the recent judgment of Calcutta Club, doctrine of mutuality also can be considered as applicable. In this sense, take the example of that Columbia which Sujata referred to, where the employee is working for the entire organization, whether it is X place, Y place, or Z place. Now, how can you apportion that 1 hour is you are apportioning to HO, second hour you are going to the Bangalore, and third to Calcutta? I mean, this is absolutely full of uncertainty and ambiguity. In my view, this can be challenged to the basic question is the applicability of GST at all. GST cannot apply to any transaction which does not amount to a transaction of supply, because supply postulates a supplier and the recipient, and there has to be two different persons. Basic question that's what I'm thinking, that it cannot be applicable at all, and therefore the question of charging, this AR is always one of the recovering officer, I would say, or a revenue officer. You will never find any judgment or any order of advance ruling in favor of an SSC. And therefore, I have made a representation also that go by the principles accepted and formulated by the recent judgment of the Madras High Court in Revenue Bar Association's case. Revenue Bar Association, that means all appellate authorities have to be independently and judiciously manned. In other words, there should not be part and parcel of the administration. That's a different aspect of the matter, which I will deal with it later on. The question here now about consideration, take for the consideration. Can you say, when I am doing something for my own branch, that there is any consideration of, and that to a value which can be valued? According to me, no. Then there are some of the other aspects which Sujata referred to, and that is regarding the taxes levied under any law for the time being in force. This is going to be a very, very great, big gate opened. Take, for example, I'm just giving an example which come to my mind. I have supplied goods for a consideration to the recipient on X amount, say 1,000 rupees. He pays me check by 1,000 rupees. I deposit the check to the bank. Check gets rebounced, dishonored, and the bank charges me for the dishonorability. Now, whatever I have suffered, whatever dishonor charges which bank has charged on me, the supplier recovers by a separate debit note. What will be the position? Can it be said that it also forms part of the consideration of the supply? Think of, these are all things, how very it is, because this is a charge under the banking law. Whether it is permitted or not, I don't know, but I assume that it is permitted. But then the question is, charge is levied under any law for the time being in force. Take another example. I want urgent supply. I request the supplier that time is essence. I want within 24 hours particular quantity of material. Now, for that purpose, the supplier asks his workers that you will have to have an extra shift. Normally one shift, go by second shift. Now, under the Factories Act, overtime has to be paid by the supplier because there is an extra shift. Now, this overtime which he has paid, he recovers from the recipient by a separate debit note. What will be the position? Because it's directly related to the supply of goods. And therefore, in my view, such charges also, though leviable under the Factories Act, will form part of the consideration. See what extent it goes unthought of. Bank charges. Now, Sujata has referred to the Gujarat Export Corporation's case. But here, friends, I have gone through that Bombay High Court judgment. But that the facts are different. Facts are that it was a CIF basis. And the moment documents are given, the seller has no, I would say he has deemed to have transferred the title to the goods. And under the Custom Act, an importer is one who is owning the goods till at the time of clearance of the goods. And therefore he pays the duty. That payment of duty by the ultimate buyer can never form part of the CIF value which the importer has charged. And therefore, there are two different things one has to consider as far as this position is concerned. Premlata Bansal ji, good morning. I am waiting for you only. Yeah, because I can extend, I can cut, no problem for you. Now, friends, I want to stick to the time. Well, friends, there are several things which can be stated, but my only request to all of you is apply your independent mind. Don't go by what the provisions say. Independently, you apply your mind, and I am sure you will be able to challenge it appropriately. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your remark, Chairman's remark. I request Sri Samir Bhai Jani to present a memento to Sri P.C. Joshi, sir, as a mark of love and respect. Sir. I request Sri Avinash Lalwani to present a memento to Sujata Madam. Now I request Sri Rahul Thakur to propose a very hearty vote of thanks.
Good day, everyone. So I have been given this present task of giving vote of thanks. Friends, when GST came in, or it was coming, we youngsters thought that it would be very simple, minimal interpretation problems, right? But as they say, a dog's tail can never be straight, however long you put it in a pipe. So our Indian tax system is nothing less than a dog's tail. The situation is such that every 6 months they have to, or every now and then they have to change the format in GST, or the return formats, or the details to be provided in the returns. So, but coming to valuation, from my limited experience, I can say that the maximum litigation, or most of the litigation, the excise and customs is regarding valuations. And similar provisions have been adopted under GST. So definitely we are going to see a influx of lot of valuation related cases. And Sujata ma'am has done an excellent job on taking all the valuation aspects under the GST very aptly to the point, along with case laws and examples. Thank you, ma'am. I'll request all the delegates to give a loud round of applause for ma'am for sharing her knowledge on the subject. And of course, any family is adhura without the head of the family, and Joshi sir is our head of the family of the AIFTP. So I'll definitely thank Joshi sir for giving us this valuable inputs and different aspect altogether under GST to challenge it. So I'll request everybody to give a loud round of applause for Joshi sir. I'll also thank Avinash Tallavani sir, Samir Jani sir and Praveen sir for being on the dais. And before we conclude this session, one small announcement. We'll continue with the session. People can bring in the tea and enjoy it while the second session is going on. And also one small joke to laugh. So when GST came, it seems the women were very relieved, because now men have something other than women which they don't understand. And they still follow it. So with this, we conclude this first session for today, and we'll immediately start with the second session. Thank you.